The desert wind carried fine particles of sand through the open door of the communications tent, and Corporal Bryn Ashford barely looked up from her equipment check. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the radio array, testing frequencies and confirming encryption protocols for the operation that would launch in less than 3 hours. Around her, the forward operating base hummed with the controlled chaos of pre-mission preparation, but inside her small workspace, everything remained orderly and precise. Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan ducked through the tent flap, his rifle case slung over one shoulder and that familiar smirk already forming on his weathered face. He had the look of a man who had seen too much combat to be impressed by anything anymore, especially not by a communications specialist who barely topped 5'6" and wore her dark auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "Need you to verify the comms package one more time," he said, dropping an encrypted radio unit on her work table with less care than the sensitive equipment deserved. "Command wants triple confirmation on all channels before we step off." Bryn caught the unit before it could slide off the edge, her green eyes flicking up to meet his gaze for just a moment before returning to her work. "Already done, Staff Sergeant. All channels verified and encrypted. Secondary protocols loaded. Backup frequencies confirmed with base command." Brennan raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening into something that might have been approval if it had not been wrapped in so much condescension. "Efficient little thing, are not you? Just make sure you stay on the comms during the op. We will be counting on you to keep the chatter clear while the real work happens downrange." He moved toward the exit, then paused and glanced back at the equipment spread across her workspace. "You ever actually see combat, Ashford? Or is this your first time playing in the big leagues?" Bryn's hands never stopped moving across her equipment, her voice remaining as level and professional as still water. "I have been deployed for 14 months, Staff Sergeant. This is my 3rd rotation with Special Operations teams." Right. But comms is not exactly door-kicking, is it?" Brennan chuckled and shook his head. "Just saying, when the shooting starts, try not to freeze up. The boys need someone reliable on the radio, not someone having a panic attack because things got loud." He left before she could respond, which was probably fortunate because Bryn had learned long ago that certain conversations were not worth having. Let them think what they wanted. Let them see her as just another support specialist, another piece of equipment that kept the real operators connected to command. It made things simpler, and simple was good when you're trying to focus on keeping people alive. Before we continue with this operation, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Perhaps you know someone who served with distinction in unexpected ways. Lieutenant Marcus Vance entered the tent a few minutes later, his presence immediately commanding attention despite his relatively quiet demeanor. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his position through competence rather than bravado, and Bryn appreciated that about him, even if they had never exchanged more than professional courtesies. "Status check," Corporal Vance said, his dark eyes scanning the equipment layout with an experienced gaze. "All systems green, sir. Primary and secondary channels encrypted and tested. Satellite uplink confirmed. I have programmed in emergency frequencies for the region and loaded the terrain maps into the tactical displays. Weather data shows possible wind shifts around 20 to 100 hours, but nothing that should impact communications." Vance nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. "Brennan said you were thorough." High praise coming from him. Bryn allowed herself a small smile in return. "The staff sergeant has high standards, sir." "That is diplomatic of you," Vance replied, his tone suggesting he understood exactly what kind of working relationship she had with his lead sniper. "You have everything you need for tonight?" "Yes, sir. I will be positioned at the Overwatch coordination point, maintaining communications between your element and base command. I have also packed the standard field medical kit and extra batteries for all units." "Good." Vance moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Ashford, I know some of the team can be rough around the edges, but you have earned your place here. Do not let anyone make you think otherwise." After he left, Bryn sat back in her camp chair and allowed herself one long, slow breath. Through the tent opening, she could see the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks catching the last rays of afternoon sunlight. Somewhere in those mountains, their target was coordinating insurgent activities that had cost American lives. Tonight, that would end. She reached down and adjusted the strap on her personal gear bag, her fingers brushing against the hard case tucked carefully at the bottom beneath her standard issue equipment. It had been 9 months since she had needed to open that case. 9 months since her hidden skills had been required. With any luck, it would stay that way. The convoy rolled through the mountain pass as darkness settled over the landscape like a heavy blanket. Bryn sat in the third vehicle, wedged between equipment cases and her communications gear, watching the terrain roll past through her night vision goggles. The mountains here were ancient and unforgiving, full of hidden valleys and natural defensive positions that had swallowed armies throughout history. Tonight, they would add one more operation to that long legacy. Sergeant Trey Holcomb sat across from her, his own gear carefully arranged and his secondary sniper rifle resting across his knees. He had been cordial enough since her attachment to the team, neither warm nor hostile, just professionally neutral in the way that experienced operators treated support personnel. He caught her studying the terrain and offered a slight nod. "First time in these mountains," he said, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "First time in this specific region," Bryn replied. "I have operated in similar terrain in Afghanistan. The elevation changes require careful consideration for radio propagation." Holcomb smiled slightly. "Always thinking about the technical side. Huh? That is good. We need someone who stays focused when things get complicated out here." The convoy slowed as they approached the insertion point, and Lieutenant Vance's voice crackled through the communications net with final position updates. Bryn listened carefully, her fingers already moving across her equipment to confirm signal strength and encryption integrity. Everything remained green across all channels, exactly as it should be. They dismounted in a shallow valley 2 kilometers from the target area, and the team moved with the practiced silence of operators who had worked together for years. Bryn fell into position in the middle of the formation, her communications rig secured and her personal weapon held in a relaxed but ready position. She had trained for this, had done it dozens of times before, but there was always that moment of heightened awareness when you stepped off into hostile territory. Brennan moved past her position, his rifle case now open and his weapon assembled and ready. He glanced at her with that familiar expression of amused tolerance, as if watching a child play at being a soldier. "Stay close to Holcomb," he whispered. "If contact happens, let the shooters handle it and you just keep those radios working." Bryn nodded without responding, knowing that any words would be wasted. Brennan had already moved forward, taking point position with Specialist Felix Durant, the team's weapons specialist. Durant was built like a linebacker and carried enough firepower to hold off a small army, but he moved through the darkness with surprising grace. The climb began in earnest after the first kilometer, the team ascending a narrow trail that switchbacked up the mountainside toward their overwatch position. Bryn kept pace without difficulty, her breathing controlled and her footing sure despite the loose rock and steep incline. She had grown up hiking in the Appalachian Mountains with her father, had learned to move through difficult terrain before she could drive a car, and these skills serve her well now. Corporal Nate Ramsey, the team medic, moved alongside her for part of the climb. He was younger than most of the others, probably mid-20s, with an earnest quality that had not yet been worn away by too many deployments. "You doing okay with the altitude?" he asked quietly. "Fine, thanks." Bryn adjusted her communications rig slightly. "How is your oxygen saturation?" Ramsey looked surprised by the question. Fine, I think." "Why do you ask?" "Just good practice to monitor at this elevation," she replied. "Hypoxia can affect decision-making before you realize anything is wrong. I've been tracking my own levels since we started the climb." "That is pretty smart," Ramsey admitted. "Most people do not think about that kind of thing until someone starts making mistakes." They reached the overwatch position after 90 minutes of careful movement, and the team immediately began setting up their equipment. The position offered a commanding view of the valley below, where their target compound sat like a fortress among the rocks. Lights glowed in several windows, and even from this distance, Bryn could see movement around the perimeter. Lieutenant Vance established the command position and Bryn set up her communications array beside him, running through final checks and confirming connectivity with base command. Brennan moved to the primary firing position, his movements smooth and professional as he assembled his shooting platform and began ranging the target area. 1,400 meters, he announced quietly. Wind is variable, maybe 4 to 6 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature dropping. This is going to be a technical shot. Vance studied the compound through his spotting scope. Target should appear within the next 30 minutes based on intelligence. Everyone stay sharp and stay quiet. Ashford, confirm our backup extraction plan with base. Bryn keyed her radio and spoke in measured tones, relaying position data and confirming extraction protocols. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, which was usually when operations started to go wrong. She had learned that lesson the hard way during her second deployment, when a routine patrol had turned into a running firefight that left 3 soldiers wounded and 1 vehicle destroyed. The first indication of trouble came as a whisper of sound that did not belong in the natural rhythm of the mountain night. Bryn's head came up slightly, her training screaming warnings before her conscious mind could process what she had heard. It was the soft scrape of metal on rock, the kind of sound that equipment made when someone moved without quite enough care. She keyed her radio with a single click, the prearranged signal for possible contact, and saw Vance's head turn immediately toward her position. His eyes asked the question, and she pointed slightly downslope toward the sound's origin. He nodded once and signaled Brennan, who shifted his attention from the target compound to scan the immediate area. The attack came 30 seconds later, not from below, but from 3 sides simultaneously. Muzzle flashes erupted from positions that should have been empty, and the sharp crack of rifle fire shattered the mountain silence. Bryn dropped flat behind her communications equipment as rounds snapped overhead, the distinctive sound of incoming fire triggering responses drilled into her through countless hours of training. Her hand moved automatically to her weapon while her mind processed the tactical situation with cold clarity. Contact left, contact right, contact rear. Durant's voice boomed across the radio net, his heavy weapon already returning fire in controlled bursts. Multiple shooters at least 6 positions. Lieutenant Vance was already moving, his command presence unchanged despite the chaos erupting around them. Holcomb, Brennan, acquire targets. Ramsey, stay with Ashford and maintain that communications link. Durant, suppressive fire on the left flank. Bryn's fingers flew across her radio controls, even as she kept her head down behind the minimal cover of a boulder. Base command, this is Overwatch 3. Contact at Grid 7 Interfor, 328. Multiple hostiles, ambush pattern. Requesting immediate QRF and air support. The response came back within seconds, calm and professional despite the sound of gunfire transmitting through her microphone. Copy Overwatch 3, QRF spinning up now. Air assets inbound, ETA 22 minutes. Can you hold position? Affirmative, continuing mission, Bryn replied, then switched frequencies to update the extraction team on standby. Her movements remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, her training overriding the natural human impulse to panic under fire. Ramsey had pressed himself against the rocks beside her, his medical bag clutched tight and his weapon held ready, but not yet firing. His face showed the tight control of someone managing fear through discipline, and Bryn appreciated that he was not one of those soldiers who needed to fire constantly just to feel like they were contributing. Brennan's rifle barked twice in quick succession, and somewhere in the darkness a scream cut off abruptly. Got one, he called out. Northwest position, approximately 300 meters. These guys knew we were coming. The tactical implications of that statement hung in the air like smoke. An ambush this well coordinated meant intelligence had been compromised, which meant their entire operation might be blown before it even began. But that was a problem for later. Right now, survival took priority over everything else. Specialist Durant's machine gun hammered away at the left flank positions, his fire discipline keeping the enemy from maneuvering closer. The big man had positioned himself to cover the most vulnerable approach, and his presence there was probably the only reason the team had not been overrun in the first 30 seconds of contact. Vance's voice cut through the chaos with the kind of calm that only came from leading men through worse situations than this. Brennan, I need you on that primary target. Intelligence says he is still in that compound, and this ambush might be separate from a security element. Holcomb, you have counter-sniper duty. Find whoever set this up and shut them down. Brennan hesitated for just a fraction of a second, his instinct to hunt the immediate threat warring with his orders to complete the primary mission. Then his training took over, and he shifted back toward his original firing position, his scope turning toward the distant compound where their high-value target supposedly remained unaware of the firefight erupting in the mountains above. Holcomb moved to a different vantage point, his rifle sweeping the darkness for the telltale signs of an enemy sniper position. Bryn watched him work while maintaining her radio communications, noting the economy of his movements and the systematic way he cleared sectors. He was good at his job, methodical and professional, but she could see the tension in his shoulders that came from knowing someone out there had them ranged and ready. More fire came from the right flank, heavier now, and Bryn heard the distinctive crack of rounds passing close overhead. Someone out there knew what they were doing, adjusting fire based on their muzzle flashes and movement. This was not some hastily organized patrol that had stumbled onto their position. This was a prepared ambush by people who understood small unit tactics. Vance dropped down beside her, his face streaked with dust and his eyes scanning the darkness with predatory focus. "We need to break contact or finish this in the next 10 minutes, he said quietly. That compound is going to wake up, and we will have reinforcements coming from 2 directions. Bryn nodded, her mind already working through the tactical problem. Sir, if we can suppress the right flank positions, there is a natural depression about 50 meters northeast that would give us cover for displacement. We could collapse back to secondary overwatch and still maintain line of sight on the target." Vance looked at her with new appreciation, then keyed his radio. "Durant, on my mark, I need sustained fire on the right flank positions. 30-second burn, everything you've got. Holcomb, be ready to cover our displacement." Brennan's voice came through with frustration evident beneath his professional tone. "I have got no shot on the primary target. Too much movement in the compound. They are reacting to the firefight. If we displace now, we lose this opportunity." "Negative," Vance replied. "We complete the mission or we extract intact, but we do not die on this rock, because we were too stubborn to adapt. Ashford, update base command on our situation." Bryn was already composing the message when Holcomb's rifle cracked once, the sound different from the chaotic fire around them. His voice came through the net a moment later, tight with controlled aggression. "Got their sniper. Northeast ridge, approximately 400 meters. He will not be a problem anymore." The weight of that statement settled over the team like a blanket. Their most dangerous immediate threat had just been eliminated, which meant the tactical balance had shifted slightly in their favor. But the fight was far from over, and the clock was still ticking down on their window of opportunity. The firefight settled into a deadly rhythm as both sides adjusted their tactics. Durant's sustained fire had forced the right flank attackers to ground, buying the team precious seconds to consolidate their position. Bryn maintained her communications while her eyes constantly scanned the darkness, her situational awareness keeping track of every team member's position and status. This was what she had been trained for, what months of attachment to special operations units had prepared her to handle. Movement in the compound, Brennan called out, his voice tight with focus. "Target is moving to the main building, 2nd floor. I have got a partial line of sight, but the angle is wrong. Wind is picking up too, gusting to 8 miles per hour now." Vance moved to Brennan's position and peered through the spotting scope, his jaw tightening as he assessed the situation. "Can you make the shot?" "Maybe," Brennan replied, his honesty doing him credit. "Maybe 60% confidence at this range with these conditions. That window is small and partially obstructed. If I miss, he goes to ground and we lose him for months." The tactical calculus was brutal and simple. A missed shot would alert their target and waste an opportunity that had taken weeks of intelligence work to create. But waiting might mean losing the shot entirely as reinforcements arrived from the compound. Vance had seconds to make a decision that would determine the success or failure of the entire operation. "Stand by," Vance said finally. "Let me see if we can improve the angle." "Holcomb, can you see anything from your position?" Holcomb shifted slightly, his scope sweeping across the compound below. "Negative, sir. I've got even worse line of sight from here. The building structure blocks most of my angles." Bryn's mind was already working through the problem, even as she maintained her radio watch. She had been studying the terrain since they arrived, noting sight lines and angles with the kind of automatic assessment that came from years of training most people did not know she possessed. There was a position approximately 40 meters in northwest, slightly lower elevation, that would offer a better angle into that second-floor window. But suggesting it would raise questions she was not ready to answer. The decision was taken from her when more fire erupted from the left flank, heavier and more coordinated than before. The attackers had regrouped and were pushing harder now, apparently reinforced by additional fighters who had responded to the sound of combat. Durant's weapon hammered back at them, but even his impressive firepower could not hold an entire flank by itself indefinitely. "We are running out of time," Vance said, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. "Brennan, if you have got any shot at all, take it. We cannot stay here much longer." Brennan settled behind his rifle, his breathing controlled and his body going still in that way snipers had when they were preparing to take a difficult shot. Bryn watched him work, recognizing the process because she had been through it herself more times than she could count. Range estimation, wind calculation, elevation adjustment, breathing pattern, trigger control. Every step of the sequence had to be perfect or the shot would fail. The rifle cracked and Brennan immediately worked the bolt, chambering another round while keeping his scope on target. His curse was quiet but eloquent. Mississippi went low and right caught the window frame. "Target is moving. I have lost visual." Vance's hand clenched into a fist, but his voice remained controlled. "Keep looking. He might come back into view." But they all knew the truth. A shot that close would send any intelligent target diving for cover and staying there until the situation was resolved. Their primary mission had just failed, which meant they were now fighting simply to extract without casualties. The mathematics of combat had shifted against them in an instant. "QRF is 10 minutes out," Bryn reported, her voice cutting through the team's frustration with cold tactical fact. "Air support in 15. Recommend we prepare for extract and let the birds clean up these positions." Vance nodded slowly, his face showing the disappointment of a leader who had just watched a critical mission slip away. "All right, we collapse back to the secondary position and wait for support. Durant, I need one more sustained burst to cover our movement, then you displace first. Holcomb, you are rear security. Brennan, pack your gear." The team began the practiced movements of a tactical withdrawal under fire, each man knowing his role and executing with professional precision despite the frustration of failure. Bryn started breaking down her communications equipment, her hands moving efficiently while part of her mind tracked the ongoing firefight and maintained awareness of everything happening around their position. That was when she heard it, a sound so subtle that it almost disappeared beneath the noise of combat, but distinctive enough to send ice through her veins. It was the metallic click of a safety being released, close enough that it could only mean one thing. Someone had gotten through their perimeter and was in position to engage them at point-blank range. She spun without thinking, her weapon coming up in a smooth arc that ended with her sights aligned on a figure rising from behind rocks barely 20 meters away. The enemy fighter had an RPG launcher on his shoulder, the distinctive silhouette unmistakable even in the darkness. He was aiming directly at Durant's position, and in 2 seconds he would fire a rocket that would kill or maim half their team. Bryn's rifle barked 3 times in rapid succession, her training taking over with the kind of automatic response that came from 10,000 hours of practice. The fighter went down hard, the RPG launcher clattering against the rocks unfired. Her weapon remained up and steady, covering the position in case there were more threats behind the first. Ramsey stared at her with wide eyes, his own weapon only halfway to ready position. The speed and precision of her response had been so far beyond what anyone expected from a communications specialist that it had left him temporarily frozen in surprise. The rest of the team was turning now, weapons seeking targets, trying to understand what had just happened. Brennan's voice cut through the moment with something that might have been respect mixed with confusion. "The hell was that, Ashford?" Brynn lowered her weapon slowly, her eyes still scanning for additional threats even as she processed what had just happened. The fighter with the RPG lay motionless where he had fallen, and the immediate danger had passed, but she could feel the weight of every team member's attention shifting toward her. There was no talking her way out of this one, no deflecting with professional competence in her assigned role. She had just demonstrated skills that communication specialists were not supposed to possess. "Threat neutralized," she said quietly, falling back on tactical reporting because it was safer than trying to explain. No additional contacts visible from this position. Vance moved to the dead fighter and confirmed the kill with a quick check, then looked back at Brynn with an expression that mixed assessment with curiosity. "Good shooting, Corporal. Where did you learn to respond like that?" Before she could answer, more fire erupted from multiple directions, and a moment of questioning evaporated in the immediate need for survival. The team moved as one, executing their planned withdrawal with Durant laying down, covering fire, while the others displaced by pairs. Brynn fell into the movement pattern automatically, her body executing the tactical movements while her mind was already 3 steps ahead, tracking vectors and calculating probabilities. They reached the secondary position in under 2 minutes, a natural depression in the terrain that offered better cover and clearer fields of fire. Holcomb took up a position covering their back trail, while Brennan immediately started setting up for another attempt at the primary target. His movements were faster now, driven by the urgency of a mission slipping away and the knowledge that their window was closing rapidly. Still no visual on target, Brennan reported, frustration bleeding through his professional tone. "The compound is locked down tight. Every light just went dark. They know we are here, and they are not giving us anything to work with." Vance checked his watch and keyed his radio. "Air support, this is Overwatch 3. What is your ETA?" "Overwatch 3, air support is 8 minutes out. We have Apaches inbound with full combat load. Do you need immediate danger close support?" "Negative, not yet," Vance replied. "Stand by for tasking on arrival." Brynn had her communications array set up again, maintaining their link to base command while monitoring multiple frequencies for any indication of enemy reinforcements. Her professional focus remained absolute, but she could feel Brennan's eyes on her between his scope checks, could sense the questions forming in his mind about what he had just witnessed. Ramsey moved to her position and dropped down beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That was some of the best close-quarters shooting I have seen. You drop people like that regularly in your communications training?" She met his eyes briefly, seeing genuine curiosity rather than mockery. "Standard qualification includes combat response drills. I take my training seriously." "That was a lot more than standard qual," Ramsey said softly. "Those were control shots, center mass, exactly where they needed to be. That was advanced marksmanship." Before Brynn could respond, Holcomb's voice came sharp across the radio net. "We have got movement on our 6, approximately 200 meters. At least 4 fighters moving up the trail we used. They're trying to cut off our extract route." Vance's jaw tightened as the tactical situation continued to deteriorate. "Durant, can you interdict?" "Working on it," Durant replied, shifting his heavy weapon to cover the new threat axis. "But I'm getting low on ammunition. Maybe 300 rounds left." The mathematics of combat were brutal and unforgiving. They had limited ammunition, a failed primary mission, enemy forces closing from multiple directions, and air support still several minutes away. Vance had to make a decision about whether to stand and fight or attempt to break contact and move to an alternate extraction point that would leave them even more exposed. Brennan suddenly stiffened behind his rifle. Wait, I have got movement in the compound. Someone just came out onto that second-floor balcony. He paused, his breathing controlled as he worked through his shooting solution. Range is 1,430 meters. Wind is still variable. This is the shot, but it is going to be technical as hell. Take it, Vance ordered without hesitation. This might be our only chance. Brennan settled into his shooting position, his world narrowing to the view through his scope and the complex calculations required to put a bullet on target at that range in these conditions. Bryn watched him work, recognizing the intensity of focus required for a shot this difficult. She had made similar shots herself, knew the dozens of variables that had to align perfectly for success. The rifle cracked, and Brennan immediately chambered another round, his scope staying on target. Damn it. Close but no impact. I cannot tell if I hit or miss clean. Try again, Vance said. If he is still there, take the shot. Target moved back inside. I have lost visual. Brennan's frustration was palpable now. The kind that came from knowing you were good at your job, but circumstances were conspiring against success. Sir, these conditions are beyond my comfort zone for this range. The wind is gusting too much, and I cannot get a stable read on it. Holcomb opened fire behind them, his rifle cracking steadily as he engaged the fighters, trying to cut off their escape route. Got one down, he reported, but there are more coming. We need to make a decision about extract. Vance looked at his team, at the tactical situation falling apart around them, and at the mission that was slipping through their fingers despite everyone's best efforts. His face showed the weight of command, the burden of making decisions that would determine whether his people went home alive or in body bags. Air support, this is Overwatch 3, Vance said into his radio. We need immediate tasking on arrival. Multiple enemy positions, coordinates to follow. We're going to need you to clear a path for extract. Copy Overwatch 3. We will be overhead in 5 minutes. Bryn had been watching the compound through her own optics, her trained eye noting details that others might miss. The target had appeared briefly on that balcony, which meant he was still in the building and likely felt secure enough to check on the firefight in the mountains above. He would appear again, probably soon, because men like that could not resist seeing what was happening to the forces attacking them. She made a decision then, one that would expose secrets she had kept carefully hidden for nearly a year. Lieutenant, Bryn said quietly, her voice cutting through the tactical chatter with unexpected authority. Request permission to examine the shooting solution from this position. Vance turned to look at her, his expression showing confusion mixed with the beginnings of understanding. Ashford, what exactly are you asking? She met his eyes steadily, knowing that what she said next would change everything about how the team viewed her. Sir, I have advanced marksmanship training. I might be able to identify what is affecting the shooting solution. Help Staff Sergeant Brennan make the adjustment. Brennan's head came up from his scope, his face showing something between disbelief and irritation. With all due respect to the corporal, this is not the time for amateur hour. This is a technical shot requiring years of experience. I understand that, Staff Sergeant, Bryn replied, her tone remaining professional and calm. But another set of trained eyes might help identify the issue. Vance studied her for a long moment, his tactical mind clearly weighing options and running calculations. The mission was failing, they were running out of time, and conventional approaches were not working. Sometimes in combat, you had to trust your instincts about people, even when logic suggested otherwise. Brennan, let her look, Vance said finally. We have got nothing to lose at this point. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he shifted slightly to give Bryn access to his spotting scope. She moved forward carefully, keeping low to avoid presenting a target, and settled into position beside the primary shooting platform. Her eyes found the compound immediately, tracking to the second-floor balcony where their target had briefly appeared. The wind was the primary problem, gusting unpredictably through the mountain valley and creating complex air currents that would push a bullet off course. Brennan had been trying to time his shots between gusts, but the intervals were too irregular to establish a reliable pattern. The target window was partially obstructed by structural elements, requiring precise shot placement into a narrow opening. And the range itself, 1,430 meters, was at the edge of effective accuracy for the weapon system they were using. Bryn processed all of this in seconds, her mind running through shooting solutions with the kind of automatic calculation that came from thousands of hours of training. She looked at the terrain between their position and the target, noting how the valley funneled wind in specific patterns. There was a rhythm to it if you knew what to look for, a mathematical relationship between wind speed at ground level and the gusts that affected bullet trajectory at altitude. The wind pattern cycles every 40 to 45 seconds, she said quietly. You can see it in how that dust moves near the compound perimeter. When the ground level wind drops, you have about 8 seconds before the altitude gust hits. That is your window. Brennan stared at her. How do you know that? Ballistic physics and environmental observation, Bryn replied. The wind is not random. It is following the terrain contours. If you time your shot for the transition between ground and altitude wind, you can minimize the deflection. Holcomb's rifle cracked again behind them, punctuating the moment with deadly emphasis. We are running out of time here, people. More fighters moving up the trail. I count at least 6 now. Vance made his decision. Brennan, try it. Use her wind call. Brennan looked like he wanted to argue, but professionalism and the desperate tactical situation overrode his pride. He settled back behind his rifle, his breathing controlled as he waited for the wind cycle Bryn had identified. Seconds ticked past with agonizing slowness, while enemy fire continued to snap overhead and the sound of Holcomb's careful shooting marked each target engaged on their back trail. The target appeared again on the balcony, a figure in traditional dress who moved with the confidence of someone who believed himself safe from harm. Brennan's finger tightened on the trigger, waiting for the precise moment when wind conditions aligned with opportunity. Now, Bryn said softly, ground wind is dropping. Brennan fired and immediately worked the bolt, his scope staying on target through the recoil. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, that brief moment when a long-range shot was still in flight and success or failure hung in the balance. Then through the optics they saw the target drop, saw the sudden chaos as security personnel rushed to the balcony, saw the unmistakable signs of a successful hit. Target down, Brennan said, his voice tight with a complex mix of emotions. Confirm target down. Mission complete. Vance keyed his radio. Base command, this is Overwatch 3. Primary target eliminated. Requesting immediate extraction support. We have multiple enemy contacts and need air cover for withdrawal. Copy Overwatch 3. Air support is now overhead, marking enemy positions and beginning attack runs. Ground QRF is 5 minutes from your location. The distinctive sound of Apache attack helicopters swept overhead, and moments later the night lit up with rocket fire as the pilots began systematically destroying enemy positions around the team's location. The pressure on their perimeter eased immediately as fighters broke contact and scattered, unwilling to face the overwhelming firepower of attack helicopters. Bryn maintained her communications discipline, coordinating the air support and guiding the QRF to their position, but she could feel the weight of questions building around her. Brennan had not looked at her since taking the shot, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved with careful deliberation that suggested a man processing information he did not quite want to accept. The QRF arrived with a roar of engines and a professional aggression that pushed the remaining enemy fighters into full retreat. Within 10 minutes, the team was loaded into vehicles and racing back toward base, the mission accomplished despite nearly impossible odds. But the victory fell hollow to Bryn because she knew what was coming next. Vance sat across from her in the vehicle, his eyes studying her face in the dim red light of the interior. When we get back, you and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about your background and training. That was not standard communications specialist knowledge. Yes, sir, Bryn replied quietly. I understand. Brennan was in the seat beside Vance, his rifle secured, but his mind clearly working through implications. Wind calls like that require advanced training and extensive field experience. You read that terrain like someone who has done it before many times. I have, Staff Sergeant, Bryn admitted. Just not in the role you thought I was filling. Ramsey leaned forward from his position, his young face showing more curiosity than judgment. "So who are you really, Ashford? Because that whole humble communications specialist thing is starting to look like a pretty good cover story." Bryn looked at each of them in turn, seeing the questions and the reassessment happening behind their eyes. The truth was going to come out now, whether she wanted it to or not. The only question was whether she told it on her terms or let them piece it together from speculation and records requests. The convoy rolled through the darkness in silence, broken only by the rumble of engines and the occasional radio check. Bryn sat with her equipment secured and her mind already preparing for the conversation she knew was inevitable. There was no point in deflecting anymore, no value in maintaining a cover that had been thoroughly compromised by the night's events. The only question now was how much to reveal and how to frame it in a way that would not destroy the professional relationships she had carefully built over the past year. They reached the forward operating base just as dawn began painting the eastern sky with streaks of pale orange and gold. The team dismounted in silence, each man processing the mission in his own way, dealing with the adrenaline crash and the complicated emotions that came from success achieved through unexpected means. Vance gestured for Bryn to follow him, and she fell in a step behind her commanding officer with the kind of automatic discipline that had been drilled into her since basic training. The debriefing room was small and austere, just a table and chairs with a secure communications link for after-action reports. Vance closed the door and gestured for Bryn to sit, then settled into his own chair with the careful deliberation of a man organizing his thoughts. He studied her for a long moment before speaking, his eyes searching for truths that had been hidden beneath professional competence. "I pulled your complete file while we were en route," he said quietly. "The unclassified version says you're a communications specialist with standard infantry qualifications. Nothing about advanced marksmanship training or sniper certification. So either those records are incomplete or you've been operating under a very specific cover." Bryn met his gaze steadily, knowing that half-truths would only make things worse. "The records are accurate for my current military occupational specialty, sir, but they do not reflect my complete training background." Vance leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Explain." She took a slow breath and began the story she had never planned to tell. "My father was Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Ashford, Marine Corps Scout Sniper. He served 3 tours and held the training record at the Scout Sniper Basic Course for nearly a decade. He started teaching me to shoot when I was 8 years old. By the time I was 16, I could outshoot most of his unit." Vance's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "When I turned 18, I enlisted and went through infantry training, then applied to the Army Marksmanship Unit's Advanced Sniper Program. I graduated top of my class and spent 2 years as a designated marksman with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I made shots up to 1,800 meters in combat and received 2 commendations for actions under fire. So why are you now a communications specialist attached to SEAL teams instead of operating as a sniper?" Vance asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Bryn's jaw tightened slightly, the only outward sign of the pain that particular question touched. "My father was killed during my second deployment. Friendly fire incident, wrong place at wrong time. The Marines who shot him were cleared of any wrongdoing, but it broke something in me. I realized I had been chasing his legacy my entire life, trying to prove I was as good as he was, trying to make him proud." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "After he died, I requested a transfer out of sniper operations. I wanted to serve in a way that was mine, not his. Communications seemed like a clean break, a chance to contribute without living in his shadow. And attachment to special operations units let me stay close to the kind of work I understood without having to carry a sniper rifle every day." Vance absorbed this information with the steady focus of an experienced officer evaluating new intelligence. "That is a hell of a story, Corporal, but it raises some significant questions about operational readiness and proper utilization of assets. If command had known about your background, you might have been assigned differently." "I know, sir," Bryn replied, "but I made my choice and I have served honorably in my assigned role. What happened tonight was an emergency situation. I did what needed to be done. Before Vance could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door, and Brennan entered without waiting for permission. His face showed the kind of barely controlled intensity that came from a man whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. He looked at Bryn with an expression that mixed respect, frustration, and something that might have been embarrassment. "I want to know how good you really are," he said without preamble. That win call tonight was not luck. That was experience and training at a level that does not come from weekend hobby shooting. Bryn held his gaze, seeing the need behind the question. Brennan was not asking out of idle curiosity. He was asking because his professional pride had been wounded, and he needed to understand whether he had been working alongside someone whose skills exceeded his own. "I qualified expert marksman with the M110 and M2010 systems," she said quietly. "My longest confirmed combat kill was 1,760 meters. I spent 2 years training other shooters in advanced techniques. My wind reading skills were considered exceptional by my instructors." Brennan's jaw worked as he processed this information. "So when you were watching me set up tonight, you already knew exactly what was wrong with my shooting solution. You could have taken that shot yourself." "Probably yes," Bryn admitted. "But that was not my role, and it was not my place to override your authority." The room fell silent as the implications settled over all three of them. Vance looked at Brennan, then at Bryn, his tactical mind clearly working through the operational and personnel management issues this situation created. Finally, he stood and moved to the secure communications terminal. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "This situation requires command-level decisions about proper asset utilization. Ashford, you're confined to base until we sort this out. Brennan, go get some rest, and we will continue this discussion after everyone has had time to process." Brennan nodded stiffly and left without another word. Bryn remained seated, her hands folded in her lap and her mind already racing ahead to what would come next. She had spent a year hiding her true capabilities, trying to serve in a role that was hers rather than her father's legacy. Now that cover was blown, and she would have to face the consequences of that exposure. "One more question," Vance said, turning back to face her. "If you had to make that shot tonight, the one I gave to Brennan, could you have made it?" "Yes, sir," Bryn replied without hesitation. "I could have made it." Vance nodded slowly, a slight smile crossing his tired face. "Then I think we need to have a very different conversation about how you serve on this team going forward." The next 48 hours passed in a strange limbo where Bryn continued her communications duties while knowing that fundamental changes were coming. The team treated her differently now, with a mixture of respect and uncertainty that came from discovering someone was not who they had believed. Ramsey remained friendly, asking occasional questions about her training background with genuine interest. Durant nodded to her with a new level of acknowledgement when their paths crossed. Holcomb studied her with the assessing gaze of a fellow professional, clearly reevaluating everything he thought he knew about her capabilities. Brennan was the most complicated. He maintained professional distance, but she caught him watching her sometimes, his face showing the internal struggle of a man whose pride had taken a significant blow. He had been the team's designated expert, the shooter everyone relied on for the hardest shots, and now he had to reconcile that identity with the knowledge that someone he had dismissed as support personnel might actually be better than him. On the third day after the mission, Vance summoned her to his office. She entered to find not just the lieutenant, but also a senior officer she recognized from briefings, Major Cassidy Trent from Special Operations Command. The major was a compact woman in her mid-40s with steel gray eyes and the bearing of someone who had fought her way to rank through competence rather than politics. "Corporal Ashford," Major Trent said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down. We need to discuss your future with this unit." Bryn sat, her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, presenting the image of a professional soldier ready to accept whatever decisions her superiors made. She had learned long ago that fighting against command decisions rarely produced positive outcomes. Better to listen, understand the situation, and then determine how to proceed. "Lieutenant Vance has provided a detailed after-action report from your recent operation," the major continued. "He has also requested that I review your complete service record, including your time with the Ranger Regiment and your training at the Army Marksmanship Unit. I have to say, your background is quite impressive. Thank you, ma'am, Bryn replied neutrally. Major Trent leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp and assessing. What I want to know is why someone with your level of training and proven combat effectiveness chose to serve as a communications specialist. And do not give me the official line about wanting to try something new. I want the real reason. Bryn met the Major's gaze and made a decision to be completely honest. Ma'am, I was living my father's dream instead of my own. He was a legendary Marine sniper, and I spent my entire life trying to measure up to his legacy. When he died, I realized that I had never asked myself what I wanted. I had only ever asked what would make him proud. And communications was your way of stepping out of that shadow, Major Trent said, understanding evident in her tone. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to serve in a way that was mine, not his. I wanted to prove I could contribute without being defined by my marksmanship skills. The Major sat back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. I can respect that, Corporal, but the reality is that the military needs to utilize its personnel where they can provide the most value. Your skills as a sniper are rare and valuable, especially among soldiers who can integrate with special operations teams. We have plenty of competent communication specialists. We have very few snipers of your caliber. Bryn felt her stomach tighten, but kept her expression neutral. What are you saying, ma'am? I am saying that I am recommending you be reassigned to a sniper billet with this unit, Major Trent replied. You would maintain some communications duties since you have proven competent in that area, but your primary role would be as a designated marksman and long-range shooter. Lieutenant Vance has specifically requested this assignment. Vance spoke up for the first time since the meeting began. You saved the mission 2 nights ago, Ashford. Your wind reading and tactical assessment were flawless. More importantly, when Staff Sergeant Brennan was questioning whether he could make the shot, you provided the solution that made success possible. That is exactly the kind of thinking we need on this team. Bryn looked between them, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was everything she had been trying to avoid, the return to a role that would inevitably draw comparisons to her father and resurrect all the complicated emotions she had been working to move past. But it was also an honest assessment of where she could provide the most value, and she had not joined the military to pursue personal comfort. Ma'am, if I accept this reassignment, I need to be clear about something, Bryn said carefully. I will not compete with Staff Sergeant Brennan or try to replace him as the team's primary sniper. He is an excellent shooter with years of experience. If I'm going to do this, it needs to be as part of the team, not as someone challenging the existing hierarchy. Major Trent smiled slightly, the expression suggesting approval of Bryn's political awareness. Noted, you would operate as a complementary asset, not a replacement. 2 skilled snipers are better than 1, especially given the kind of missions this unit handles. There's one more thing, Vance added. Staff Sergeant Brennan has been informed of this potential reassignment. He asked me to tell you that he would have no objections to working with you in a sniper capacity. That took some courage on his part, and I think it shows the kind of professional maturity this team values. Bryn absorbed that information with surprise and a measure of respect for Brennan. Admitting that someone he had dismissed might be his equal or better required exactly the kind of humility that made good soldiers into great ones. If he could set aside his pride, then she could set aside her reluctance to return to a role she had been avoiding. I accept the reassignment, ma'am, Bryn said quietly. If the team needs me in that capacity, then that is where I will serve. Excellent, Major Trent replied. Your official orders will be processed within 72 hours. In the meantime, I suggest you start coordinating with Staff Sergeant Brennan on equipment needs and integration into the team's tactical planning. You'll also need to re-qualify on the weapon systems since it has been over a year since you last operated in a sniper capacity. Yes, ma'am. Bryn stood and saluted, the gesture crisp and professional despite the emotional turbulence beneath her calm exterior. As she turned to leave, Major Trent spoke again. Corporal, one last thing. Your father would be proud of you, not because you became a sniper like him, but because you serve with honor and put the mission above your personal preferences. That is the mark of a true professional. Bryn nodded, not trusting her voice to respond without betraying the emotion those words stirred. She left the office and walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, squinting against the glare and feeling the weight of her decision settling over her shoulders like familiar gear. The requalification process began the next morning at the base range, a stretch of desert terrain that extended out to 2,000 meters with carefully measured distance markers and wind flags positioned at regular intervals. Bryn arrived at dawn carrying the hard case she had kept hidden at the bottom of her gear for the past year. The weight of it familiar and somehow comforting despite all her complicated feelings about what it represented. Brennan was already there, his own rifle laid out on a shooting mat and his spotting scope set up to observe the range. He looked up as she approached, his expression neutral but not hostile. The tension between them had shifted into something different now, a professional acknowledgement that they would need to work together regardless of personal feelings. "Morning, Ashford," he said, the greeting simple but carrying more weight than those two words alone could convey. "Vance said you would be out here early. I figured I would spot for you. Make sure you're still sharp after a year away from the scope." "Appreciate that, Staff Sergeant," Bryn replied, setting down her case and opening it with practiced movements. Inside lay her personal rifle, a custom-built precision weapon that her father had helped her assemble during her last leave before his death. She had not touched it since requesting her transfer, but her hands remembered every detail of its weight and balance as she lifted it free. "That is a beautiful piece of equipment," Brennan observed, genuine appreciation in his voice as he studied the rifle. "Custom build? My father and I put it together," Bryn said quietly. He insisted, "I learned every aspect of the weapons system, from barrel selection to trigger assembly." He said a sniper who did not understand their tools was just someone pointing in a general direction and hoping. "Smart man," Brennan replied. "My old instructor used to say the same thing. What is your zero distance?" 500 meters, adjusted for elevation and temperature. "I will need to reconfirm, since it has been a while." She settled into position behind the rifle, her body remembering the stance and posture even after months of disuse. The weapon came up to her shoulder with the kind of natural fit that only came from thousands of hours of practice. And when she pressed her eye to the scope, the world narrowed to that circle of magnified clarity that had once been as familiar as breathing. "Take your time," Brennan said from beside her, his voice professional and instructional rather than condescending. "Wind is light out of the northwest, maybe 3 miles per hour. Temperature is 68 degrees and climbing. Range is 500 meters to the first target." Bryn let her breathing settle into the steady rhythm that preceded every shot, her finger resting lightly on the trigger while her mind processed the environmental data and her body made micro-adjustments to position and alignment. The target was a standard silhouette, nothing complicated, just a verification that her zero remained true and her fundamentals were still solid. The rifle cracked, and she worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round while keeping her scope on target. Through the magnification, she saw the impact point, center mass exactly where she had aimed. The muscle memory was still there, preserved beneath months of deliberate avoidance, like a skill written into her bones. "Dead center," Brennan confirmed through his spotting scope. "Your zero is still good. Move to the 700-meter target when you are ready." They worked their way through the range systematically, Brennan calling wind and distance while Bryn reacquainted herself with the demands of precision shooting. At 700 meters, she placed 3 rounds within a 6-inch group. At 1,000 meters, she adjusted for the increasing wind and put 5 rounds into an 8-inch circle. At 1,500 meters, the shots that separated competent marksmen from true snipers, she took her time and placed 3 rounds within a 12-inch group that would have been instantly lethal on human targets. Brennan lowered his spotting scope and looked at her with an expression that mixed respect with something that might have been relief. "You are not rusty. You are as sharp as anyone I have worked with. Whatever skills you had a year ago, they did not go anywhere. Muscle memory and fundamentals," Bryn replied, safing her rifle and sitting back from the shooting position. My father used to say that proper training became instinct, and instinct did not forget. He was right about that too, Brennan said. He paused, then continued in a tone that suggested he had been thinking about this conversation for some time. Look, I owe you an apology. I judged you based on your job title instead of your actual capabilities. That was unprofessional and unfair. You proved yourself under fire and you earned respect the hard way. Bryn met his eyes, seeing genuine contrition there rather than empty words spoken out of obligation. I understand, Staff Sergeant. You had no reason to expect anything different from what my records showed. I was the one operating under false pretenses, hiding skills that should have been disclosed. Maybe, Brennan admitted, but I could have been less of an ass about it. I let my ego get in the way of seeing what was right in front of me. That wind call you made saved the mission. I was too focused on the technical difficulty of the shot to see the pattern you identified. We both did our jobs, Bryn replied. That is what matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning sun climbing higher and warming the desert air around them. In the distance, the rest of the base was coming alive with the sounds of morning formation and equipment checks. It was a new day in more ways than one, and Bryn could feel the weight of her decision settling into something that felt less like burden and more like purpose. So what happens now, she asked. How do we integrate two snipers into a team that was built around one? Brennan smiled slightly, the expression genuine and without the condescension that had marked their earlier interactions. We train together. We plan together. We learn each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses. Two shooters means we can cover more angles, engage multiple targets simultaneously, or provide backup if one of us gets hit like I did. It makes the whole team more capable. That makes sense tactically, Bryn agreed, but it is going to require trust. You need to trust that I will not try to overshadow you, and I need to trust that you will not resent having me in this role. Fair enough, Brennan replied. So let us start building that trust right now. I want you to teach me how you read that wind pattern. I missed something obvious and you caught it. That means my training has gaps that need filling. Bryn felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since the mission without fully recognizing its weight. This was not competition or resentment. This was two professionals recognizing that they could make each other better. That partnership was stronger than rivalry. All right, she said. Let me show you what my father taught me about reading terrain and predicting wind patterns. The next 2 weeks transformed the team's dynamic in ways both subtle and profound. Bryn's official reassignment came through with her new designation as Designated Marksman and Secondary Communications Specialist. The dual role meant she would maintain some of her previous responsibilities while taking on the primary sniper duties that her skills warranted. It was a compromise that allowed her to keep one foot in the world she had chosen while stepping back into the role she had been trying to escape. Brennan proved true to his word about building partnership rather than competition. They spent hours on the range together, sharing techniques and learning each other's methods. He taught her his approach to reading mirage and using environmental indicators she had never considered. She showed him the mathematical models her father had developed for predicting wind patterns in complex terrain. Their combined knowledge created something greater than either possessed individually. The rest of the team adapted with professional efficiency. Durant started including both snipers in tactical planning sessions, asking for their input on overwatch positions and engagement angles. Holcomb worked with them on coordinated fire solutions that would allow multiple simultaneous engagements. Ramsey updated his casualty evacuation plans to account for the possibility that either sniper might be injured and need immediate extraction. Lieutenant Vance orchestrated it all with the steady hand of a leader who understood that team cohesion was as important as individual skill. 3 weeks after her reassignment, they received orders for a new mission. Intelligence had located a high-value target operating a weapons smuggling network that supplied insurgent forces throughout the region. The target moved frequently and maintained excellent operational security, but analysis suggested he would be attending a meeting at a remote compound in the mountains within the next 72 hours. The mission profile was similar to their last operation, but this time they would have two snipers working in coordination from the start. The briefing room was crowded with the full team plus support personnel from intelligence and logistics. Major Trent attended via secure video link, her presence indicating the operation's significance. Maps covered the walls showing the target area, approach routes, and contingency plans. Satellite imagery revealed the compound's layout and defensive positions. This is a time-sensitive target, Vance explained, using a laser pointer to highlight key terrain features. Our window is narrow, and we will only get one chance at this. The target will be at this compound for approximately 6 hours during a leadership meeting. Our mission is to eliminate him and as many of his lieutenants as possible, disrupting the entire smuggling network. Brennan and Bryn studied the imagery together, already thinking through shooting solutions and angles of approach. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by high ground, offering multiple potential overwatch positions. The challenge would be coordinating their fire to maximize effectiveness while maintaining security against the kind of ambush that had nearly destroyed their last mission. I recommend we split into 2 firing positions, Bryn said, tracing possible locations on the map. Primary position here on the northern ridge, secondary position to the east. That gives us coverage of the entire compound and redundancy if one position is compromised. Agreed, Brennan added. We coordinate our shots through Ashford's communications net. She can maintain radio contact while I handle the spotting and wind calls from my position. When targets present, we engage simultaneously to maximize confusion and minimize their ability to take cover. Vance nodded approvingly. Solid plan. Holcomb, you take point security for Brennan's position. Durant, you are with Ashford providing security and backup communications. Ramsey, you float between positions as needed for medical support. I will coordinate from the command position and manage the extraction timeline. The next 48 hours passed in intensive preparation. Bryn and Brennan rehearsed their coordination protocols until they could communicate target information and firing solutions with minimal radio traffic. They studied the satellite imagery until they could visualize the compound in 3 dimensions, identifying windows and doorways and calculating ranges from multiple positions. They test-fired their weapons and verified their zeros at the exact elevation they would be operating. Every detail received attention because in their line of work, the difference between success and failure often came down to preparation. The insertion went smoothly this time, the team moving into position under cover of darkness without encountering enemy patrols. Bryn settled into her firing position on the eastern ridge with Durant providing security and Ramsey positioned between the 2 sniper teams to respond quickly to either location if needed. Through her scope, she could see Brennan's position on the northern ridge, marked only by the faint heat signature visible through her thermal optics. Radio check, she whispered into her communications net. Secondary position is set. Primary position confirms, Brennan replied. I have good visibility on the main compound building. Range is 1,100 meters. Wind is light and variable from the west. Copy, Bryn said. I have the secondary buildings and eastern approach covered. Range is 1,300 meters. Wind conditions match your assessment. They settled into the patient waiting that defined sniper operations, their bodies still and their minds focused on the task ahead. Hours passed with agonizing slowness as they monitored the compound through their scopes, watching for signs of their target's arrival. The sun climbed higher, bringing with it temperature changes that affected ballistic calculations and wind patterns that required constant reassessment. Just before noon, vehicles approached the compound from the west, a convoy of 3 SUVs moving with the confident speed of people who believe themselves safe. Through her scope, Bryn watched as armed men emerged to provide security while passengers exited the vehicles. Her heart rate remained steady and her breathing controlled as she identified faces and compared them to the intelligence photographs she had memorized. Primary target confirmed. Brennan's voice came through her earpiece. Second vehicle, exiting passenger side. Gray beard, traditional dress, moving toward the main building entrance. I have him, Bryn confirmed. Secondary targets are moving with him. Count 4 high-value individuals, all entering the main building. Stand by for target development. Vance ordered from the command position. Let them get settled. We want as many of them in one location as possible before we initiate. They waited with the infinite patience of trained professionals, watching as more vehicles arrived and more people entered the compound. The meeting was assembling exactly as intelligence had predicted, bringing together the leadership of an organization responsible for hundreds of American casualties. Within that compound were men who facilitated the flow of weapons and explosives that killed soldiers and civilians alike. Target package is complete, Brennan finally reported. I count 9 high-value individuals now inside the main building, second-floor conference room. Multiple guards at ground level, but no immediate threats to our positions. Secondary confirms, Brin added. I have coverage of the eastern exit routes. If any targets attempt to escape after initial contact, I can interdict. All elements stand by, Vance ordered. On my command, both snipers will engage. Brennan takes primary target and works north to south through the conference room. Ashford takes eastern window positions and any targets attempting to flee. Execute on my mark. 3 seconds. Vance counted down. 2, 1. Execute. Brennan's rifle cracked first, the sound rolling across the valley like distant thunder. Through her scope, Brin saw the impact through the conference room window, saw the primary target drop, before he could register what was happening. She had already acquired her first target, a man moving toward the eastern exit with a purposeful stride of someone trained to react to threats. Her finger pressed smoothly through the trigger, and the rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority. First target down, she reported, working the bolt and acquiring her second target. A guard was rushing toward the eastern building entrance, weapon raised and scanning for threats. She led him slightly to account for his movement and fired again. The guard collapsed mid-stride. Primary target eliminated, Brennan confirmed, his voice carrying the focused calm of a professional executing a well-rehearsed plan. Engaging secondary targets now. Their rifles spoke in steady rhythm, each shot deliberate and precise. Brin tracked targets moving through windows and doorways, her mind calculating leads and adjustments with the automatic precision that came from thousands of hours of training. A man appeared at the eastern exit, then dropped as her bullet found him. Another emerged from a side door, and she engaged before he could take 3 steps. Through the chaos below, she could see the compound descending into panic. Guards were firing wildly in all directions, unable to locate their attackers on the high ground. Leaders who moments before had been planning operations were now scrambling for cover or lying motionless where they had fallen. The coordination between both sniper positions was creating exactly the kind of overwhelming confusion that made effective response nearly impossible. Eastern routes are locked down, Brin reported. 3 targets eliminated. No successful escapes from my sector. Northern sector clear, Brennan added. Primary target and 4 leadership figures confirmed down. Compound security is scattered and ineffective. Hold fire and assess, Vance ordered. Let them react and identify any remaining high-value targets. The compound had devolved into chaos below them. Guards were attempting to establish defensive positions, but their movements showed none of the coordination that would indicate professional military training. These were criminals and smugglers, dangerous but not prepared for the kind of precision assault they were experiencing. Several were attempting to reach vehicles for escape, but the exposures required made them vulnerable to engagement. 2 targets attempting vehicle escape, Brennan reported. Engaging now. His rifle cracked twice in rapid succession, and the men dropped before reaching their destination. Brin scanned her sector methodically, looking for any threats or targets that required engagement. Her scope swept across windows and doorways, across the compound perimeter and the approaches beyond. Everything within her field of responsibility was secure. If you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and earned respect, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Maybe you have witnessed someone rise to an unexpected challenge in your own life. We would love to hear about it. Mission complete, Vance announced. Both snipers prepare for extract. Security elements. Establish perimeter and prepare for displacement. The withdrawal was executed with the same professional precision as the assault. Bryn broke down her position methodically, securing her equipment and preparing for movement while Durant maintained security. Through her communications net, she could hear Brennan doing the same from his position, both of them working through the well-practiced steps that would allow them to leave no trace of their presence. They linked up at the rally point 20 minutes later, the team intact and the mission accomplished without casualties. Vance did a quick head count and status check, his face showing satisfaction at a plan executed flawlessly. Around them, the desert morning was peaceful and still, giving no indication of the violence that had just occurred in the valley below. Outstanding work, everyone, Vance said quietly. That was textbook execution. Both sniper positions performed exactly as planned. Ashford, Brennan, your coordination was perfect. 9 confirmed high-value targets eliminated with 0 friendly casualties. Command is going to be very pleased with these results. The extraction vehicles arrived 30 minutes later, and the team loaded up for the return to base. Bryn sat beside Brennan in the convoy, both of them maintaining their weapons and processing the mission in the way that snipers did after successful operations. There was no celebration or backslapping, just the quiet satisfaction of professionals who had done difficult work well. Back at base, the debriefing confirmed what they already knew. The mission had decimated the smuggling network's leadership, eliminating 9 of their most senior figures and throwing the organization into chaos. Intelligence estimated it would take months for them to recover, if they recovered at all. The weapons flow that had been killing American soldiers would be significantly disrupted. Major Trent appeared via video link for the after-action review, her face showing the kind of satisfaction that came from seeing plans succeed. Exceptional work by all elements, she said. This operation will serve as a training example for coordinated sniper operations. The integration of 2 shooters from different positions created tactical advantages that overwhelmed the enemy's ability to respond. She looked directly at Bryn through the camera. Corporal Ashford, your performance since reassignment has been outstanding. You have integrated seamlessly with the team and brought capabilities that have made them significantly more effective. I am recommending you for promotion to sergeant and for a commendation for your actions on both this mission and the previous operation where you provided the crucial assistance that led to success. Thank you, ma'am, Bryn replied, feeling the weight of recognition settle over her shoulders. It has been an honor to serve with this team. After the briefing ended, the team gathered in their ready room for the informal debriefing that was often more valuable than the official version. They reviewed what had worked, what could be improved, and how they might approach similar missions in the future. The conversation was professional but relaxed, marked by the easy camaraderie of people who trusted each other completely. Brennan raised a canteen in an informal toast. To Ashford, for proving that the best operator is not always the one with the loudest reputation. You earned your place here the hard way and made us all better in the process. The others raised their own canteens in acknowledgement, and Bryn felt something shift inside her. This was not her father's legacy anymore. This was not about living up to impossible standards set by someone else's achievements. This was her own path, earned through her own skills and dedication, validated by the respect of professionals who judged her on merit rather than history. Thank you, she said quietly, all of you, for giving me the chance to prove myself and for accepting me as part of this team. That means more than any commendation or promotion. Later that evening, as the sun set over the desert and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bryn found herself on the range one last time. She had her rifle with her, the weapon her father had helped her build, and she settled into a familiar shooting position just to feel the connection one more time. But this time, the weight on her shoulders felt different. She was not shooting to prove herself to a dead man's memory. She was not trying to live up to an impossible standard or escape from a shadow that followed her everywhere. She was simply a soldier, a sniper, a professional doing work that needed to be done and doing it well. The rifle felt right in her hands now, not like a burden, but like a tool that belonged there. She had tried to run from this role, tried to build an identity separate from the skills that defined her, but sometimes the path you were meant to walk was the one you kept trying to leave behind. The difference was choosing it for yourself rather than having it chosen for you. She did not fire. She just held the position, feeling the familiar weight and balance, acknowledging the past without being imprisoned by it. Then she stood, secured her weapon, and walked back toward the team area where her brothers in arms were waiting. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, and that was enough. The desert wind carried sand across the range as darkness settled over the base, and Corporal Bryn Ashford walked forward into whatever came next with confidence, purpose, and the hard-earned respect of those who mattered most. The sun had fully set by the time the final mission briefing concluded, and the team gathered their gear with the practiced efficiency of operators who had done this countless times before. Bryn moved through her pre-mission checklist with methodical precision, testing every piece of communications equipment twice and ensuring her backup systems were fully charged and accessible. Her personal gear bag sat beside her workstation, innocuous and ordinary-looking, hiding the hard case at the bottom that contained secrets she hoped would remain buried. Specialist Felix Durant entered the tent carrying enough ammunition to fight a small war, his massive frame somehow managing to move quietly despite the weight of equipment he carried. He had the build of a college linebacker and the demeanor of someone who had seen enough combat to no longer feel the need to prove anything. He nodded to Bryn as he checked his weapon, his movements smooth and professional. "You ready for tonight, Ashford?" he asked, his deep voice carrying genuine interest rather than the condescension she sometimes received from others. "First time working directly with our unit on a hot operation, right?" "Third time, actually," Bryn replied, not looking up from her equipment check. "I was attached to your team during the compound raid in October and the vehicle interdiction in November. I maintained communications from the base both times." Durant paused in his weapons check, clearly surprised. "I did not realize that was you. Command never mentioned we had the same comms specialist on those ops. Most people do not pay attention to who is on the other end of the radio as long as the connection stays clear," Bryn said without any trace of bitterness. "It is the nature of the job." "Well, you kept us connected when it mattered," Durant replied. "That vehicle op got messy fast, and you never missed a transmission. That is professional work. Thank you, Specialist. I appreciate that." Corporal Nate Ramsey entered next, his medical kit already secured, and his youthful face showing the focused intensity of someone preparing for potential casualties. He was the youngest member of the team, probably no more than 24, but his skills as a combat medic had already saved lives on multiple deployments. He gave Bryn a friendly nod and settled into a corner to conduct his own pre-mission checks. The team's informal hierarchy was evident in how they moved and interacted. Lieutenant Vance commanded absolute respect through competence and steady leadership. Staff Sergeant Brennan held the position of senior enlisted and primary sniper, his experience and skills giving him authority that went beyond rank. Sergeant Holcomb operated as the quiet professional, solid and dependable without needing recognition. Durant and Ramsey were the younger operators, still building their reputations, but already proven in combat. And Bryn existed in a category apart, essential to operations, but separate from the core team, accepted but not quite integrated. She had learned to be comfortable in that space between insider and outsider. It was easier than trying to force acceptance or prove herself in ways that would raise uncomfortable questions. Better to be the reliable communications specialist who did her job well and stayed out of the way. Better to be underestimated than to invite the scrutiny that would come from demonstrating capabilities she was trying to keep hidden. Lieutenant Vance conducted a final team briefing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the operations tent, his voice calm and authoritative as he reviewed the mission timeline and contingency plans. Maps covered the walls showing their route, the target location, and multiple extraction points depending on how the operation developed. Intelligence photographs displayed their target, a man responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed American soldiers and local civilians alike. "We step off in 30 minutes, Vance concluded. "Weather is clear, moon is minimal, conditions are optimal. Everyone check your buddy's gear one more time and meet at the vehicles. Ashford, you will ride with me and maintain command communications throughout the operation." "Yes, sir," Bryn replied, already visualizing her role in the mission and the dozens of potential complications she needed to be prepared to handle. As the team began their final preparations, Brennan approached her position with that familiar expression of amused tolerance. "You look nervous, Corporal. This is just another night at the office for us. You'll be fine as long as you remember to keep your head down and let the professionals handle the dangerous stuff." Bryn met his eyes briefly, seeing the genuine belief behind his condescension. He truly thought he was being encouraging, offering reassurance to someone he perceived as inexperienced and potentially unreliable under pressure. She could have corrected him, could have mentioned her own combat deployments and the situation she had already survived, but what would be the point? His assumptions made him comfortable and confident teammates perform better in combat. "I will do my job, Staff Sergeant," she said simply. "You focus on yours." "That is the spirit," Brennan replied, clapping her on the shoulder with casual familiarity. "Just remember, when things get loud, your job is to stay calm and keep those radios working. We will handle everything else." He moved away before she could respond, and Bryn returned to her equipment check with the same methodical focus she brought to everything. Her fingers moved across radio controls and backup systems, testing connections and verifying encryptions. But part of her mind was already running through tactical scenarios and potential complications that extended far beyond her official role. The hard case at the bottom of her gear bag seemed to weigh more than it should, a physical reminder of capabilities she had sworn to herself she would not use again. She had left that life behind, had chosen a different path, had committed to serving in a way that was hers rather than a continuation of her father's legacy. But old training never really left. Old skills remained sharp even when deliberately unused, and somewhere deep inside she knew that if circumstances required it, she could step back into that role as easily as breathing. The vehicles rolled out exactly on schedule, their headlights cutting through the desert darkness as they headed toward the mountains and whatever waited in the shadows ahead.